Yeah.
All right, so everybody, I'd like to welcome Mamta Melwani. She works for TikTok in Singapore. She studied in the United States, but she could do a better introduction of herself than I can. So, Mamta, thank you so much for taking the time to join us at 1 o'clock in the morning from Singapore, the reality of working abroad. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. So briefly about me, I am currently working at TikTok. I work on their public policy team, which I can talk a little bit more about later. But she is right. I did study in the US. I started in Seattle at community college, and then transferred to New York and finished my education there. So I finished my degree there and then ended up working there for another 2 years or so, where I worked with the state government, I worked with the city government, and then also worked at the Institute of International Education, which they're known for administering the Fulbright program, if any of you are familiar with that. But now I'm back home in Singapore. I worked for an NGO on gender equality before making the move to TikTok, and now I'm here. But if there's anything you have to remember or know about me, I'm very passionate about women's rights, and I will do anything, whether it's professionally or personally. I try to volunteer and help out within that space. But that's also my drawing point to TikTok. I would not have taken a job in the tech sector or in the corporate space had it not been even remotely related to that. But I'm happy to answer any questions or share a little bit more about what I do, and probably how tech intersects with human rights. I know that's what we're here to discuss today, but maybe I'll open up the floor for questions because I feel like it might be more interactive that way. Stacey, is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You're in charge. You can run it how you want it.
Okay, I'll open up for questions.
So have you been instrumental in finding human trafficking rings, those kind of things based on social media posts and things like that? What kind of things have you been able to do with that kind of ideal?
Yeah, great question. So on the team that I work with, we essentially focus on different human rights issues, and I tend to focus on sexual exploitation and body positivity for women. We do focus quite a bit on sexual assault as well as domestic violence, and sex trafficking is the third category, but sex trafficking is meant to be the highest risk. So what we do is we collaborate with law enforcement agencies in different regions that we operate in. So we draft the policies and we set the stage for, okay, how do we identify that it might be sex trafficking? How do we identify which regions are the most highest at risk for trafficking and whether it involves a higher degree of minors or adults? So we do a lot of back end work on that before we actually pass on information and cases to law enforcement. So we don't take any concrete action on that, but essentially what we do is we help in identifying where the online harm exists. And once we have that information, we pass it on. The other thing that we do is most of our law enforcement and identification work that you're referring to actually happens for sex trafficking and minor safety. So child abuse is top priority for us, versus with sexual assault and domestic violence. It can be very hard to tell on the platform if it's occurring in the moment or it's occurred prior and is now being shared on the platform. But we do prioritize sex trafficking and child abuse when it comes to law enforcement. But yes, we do identify rings, we do identify when CSAM trading is occurring on the platform, and we work with law enforcement to address that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
So I have a question, Mamta.
Sure.
So you said that your background originally wasn't working in the digital space. It was mostly working with women's rights and working for NGOs and stuff. How difficult has it been for you to translate your work into that space? How have you learned your skills to work in this medium?
Good question. I think for me, the initial adjustment was less to do with applying my work and more with the work culture and how fast-paced the environment is. So when it comes to the core work that I do, I still have full autonomy over how we define policy principles and how we define principles as a company when it comes to the issue I work on. And that was helpful given my background because I understand impact on sexual assault survivors, I understand consent, I understand the nuances of what goes into physical and sexual abuse. However, when it came to work culture, I think there is a stark difference between the way NGOs work, the public sector works, and the private sector. One, obviously, like I mentioned, is the pace at how quickly we operate. The turnaround time is so quick, and we're also dealing with very high risk cases. So in terms of reporting to law enforcement, with reporting to government bodies or regulatory agencies, that has been a challenge whereby you have to be on top of things. And sometimes that means at 6 o'clock when it's time to shut off work and you have a major escalation, you're not actually shutting off. The other thing I would say is that there is an aspect of monetization and platform integrity that comes into play when you work in the tech sector, which is not a consideration when you're in the NGO space. So if you're looking to do political advocacy or human rights advocacy without the element of monetization, without the element of platform integrity, then the NGO space is for you. But when you come into the tech space, you're leveraging all the resources you have to address some of these human rights issues, but there's also a sense of pushback, and you need to be willing to fight with leadership or justify your stances. Because at the end of the day, it's not just human rights for them. It's also, okay, how is this going to impact profit? How is this going to impact the way users view us as a company? And oftentimes it's not as straightforward as saying, well, we need to support LGBTQ issues, because we'll still get pushback from more conservative regions or government agencies that do not actually support the issue. Does that answer your question?
Oh, definitely, definitely. To kind of expand on that, and if please anyone else, if you have questions, open it up. But the thing is you're working in Singapore, but you're working in a medium that works across many borders. So how
Yeah.
does that impact things too? Because you probably have to take into account political systems, national religion,
Yeah.
conservatism versus more liberal societies. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that when you're dealing with all these different issues in so many different cultures and countries?
Yeah. So two things. One is that's where my background working in different countries comes in handy. Working in the US, I think, is good exposure to what conservative and liberal can mean, especially within political systems. That's a plus point. But at the same time, I think because the industry is growing, so trust and safety within the tech industry is growing so rapidly, that it helps you gain access to resources when it comes to external engagement as well. So for regions that I'm not familiar with, I will work with NGOs on the ground, or I will leverage country policy engagements, which has been really cool because this is not something I got to do in the NGO space. We didn't have the resources for that. Versus over here, it's nice because we have teams that will allow us to connect on the ground with communities and NGOs in different regions. So it's not me as one person calling the shots or making assumptions or decisions solely based on what I know, but rather it's an ongoing, constant process to understand, okay, what's happening in that market right now? What is user perception? What are the laws in that country? And also for me, I think this work is interesting to me personally, and I'm very personally invested. So I think a lot of it also just comes from reading and staying in touch with news and picking up little here and there from like the UN pages or NGOs that I follow. So it's also a very personal thing, but both ways, personally and professionally, I think I've been equipped with those resources.
That's fascinating. Who else has a question? I'm not the only one here. Come on, y'all.
So I have a question for you. Just kind of picking up with what you were just talking about. What is kind of the most interesting side of the work that you do? Like, what's something that you really take a lot of passion in?
For me, at the end of the day, impact is really important, and I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
Impact is very important to me, always has been. And at the end of the day, some of the work that we do can be really difficult because we're looking at exploitative videos, we're making decisions such as, oh, is this content of a survivor sharing her stories should be allowed on the platform if there is like graphic detail or she's naming her abuser. There's so many nuances that we have to factor in that at the end of the day, it's fulfilling to know that we are making some form of impact, especially when I talk to people and they're like, wait, you work for sexual exploitation on the platform? We've never seen that on the platform. Or does that thing even exist on the platform? And I think in a way, it's nice that the work that we do day to day is helpful in removing that, right? So this is the idealistic person in me coming out and saying, the fact that people are not seeing such content on the platform means that somewhere we're doing our job right. So I think in the grand scheme of things, impact is important to me, but also going back to the point where we engage with different NGOs and communities, that's really exciting to me because I, as one person, despite coming from the background that I come from, I'm not going to know everything. And every day things are changing, and it's good to keep yourself updated and in the know of things. And being able to leverage these resources on a day-to-day basis to engage with people from all over the world has been really exciting for me. Does that
that's
answer the
awesome.
question?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I couldn't imagine having to kind of engage with that content, but I agree with you that the work that you do is so important. And actually also being able to give people who have survived sexual assault a voice, I think is really great.
Thank you, Jamie.
Becky had a question. She wants to know what an NGO is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so an NGO is a non-governmental organization. So we use that interchangeably with a nonprofit organization. So NGO is the equivalent of a nonprofit organization. And usually it's dedicated to some cause or a specific issue or multiple issues. So it can be as large as the United Nations. It can be Planned Parenthood. What else? I'm trying to think of NGOs that you guys might be familiar with.
I mean, it could be the Literacy Council downtown teaching people to read.
Yeah.
Non-governmental organizations they fill a gap in services, they fill a gap in society often, or they
Yeah.
could be representing people's interests. It doesn't, some of them are philanthropic and, for good causes, and others are areas of interest. They can be a lot of different things. So.
Yeah.
Well, you said you
Exactly.
worked for an NGO. What NGO did you work for?
So in the US, I worked for the Institute of International Education. So they're actually a pretty large global NGO, but they focused on providing access to education. So a number of their programs involve funding low-income students from the US going abroad and from abroad coming into the US. They also had the Fulbright program, which is pretty large. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Fulbright program, it's a worldwide governmental program where governments provide full sponsorship for students to go into different countries and experience what it's like to work and study in a different country. So it's a pretty prestigious program. And then the most exciting one for me was when they rescued scholars from war zones. So that was pretty interesting work.
Yeah, they're funding some of the Afghan scholars that were evacuated. There's also exchange programs that exist to bring specific understanding between cultures. I can happily say I got one 3 days ago. I'm going to Germany on a Fulbright. I'm so excited.
Oh my
So
God,
yes,
congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, it's an amazing organization that's existed since 1948, and I'll be happy
Yeah.
to tell anybody about IIE because I love them right now. So,
Oh, I love them too.
so
No, but that's amazing, Stacy.
thank you. So Mamta, of everything you've done, of all of your experience, what was probably one of the most pivotal things? You came from a community college and you're talking to community college students and faculty here. What
Yeah.
was the big thing that your transition from community college to a 4-year brought you to the confidence to work in this space? I mean, how did that develop? Did that develop at university, or did that come from some of your experiences in Seattle at community college? What did it?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I think people often underestimate how small colleges can factor into your growth, and I believe in the complete opposite, right? So for me, attending smaller schools, having that personal relationships with my instructors, getting that time and effort to really focus in a smaller, more personal setting was actually key for me. I was a very socially awkward student, so I think that was very helpful for me, being able to get one-on-one attention, get the time and space to learn and understand what I'm studying was very, very helpful for me. In terms of moving to a four-year college, I had been accepted into two Ivy League schools for a transfer, but could not afford to go to school, which was actually the best thing that could happen to me because I ended up working for a year at IIE, and that's how I knew I wanted to get into the nonprofit space. But also, I ended up working for a small public college. Going back to school for a small public college, and it was the same thing. Very small classes, the flexibility and ability to take classes and learn on a very personal level, which when I speak to some people who graduated from Ivy League schools, they didn't have the same experience as I did. I think for me in my smaller schools, both at community college and at my four-year college, my teachers and instructors were very invested in my personal growth. So a lot of the internship experiences I had, I would not have had the courage or the confidence to apply had they not pushed me to apply. So the New York State Scholars Program, I only got in because my instructors pushed me to apply, and that would have not happened in a larger setting. But for me, I think that has never determined the fact that I've gone to community college or a public school has never set me back in any way. I have always still gone to the best scholar programs. I have got into the best internship programs. And I'm here today. Like I work in tech, and the irony is that I hire interns that are from Ivy League schools that are almost my age. And I think that should say a lot about how experiences can accumulate, how you can work hard to be picky about what you want to do, what you want to experience, and what you want to learn out of it. Not to say I only hire Ivy Leagues, I don't. I love students from all backgrounds, but just to point out that at the end of the day in the job market, you can be on the same level. So don't let that discourage you, or don't feel like you're not going to get any of the same opportunities. Network, talk to people, and be very strategic about what you want. Don't let everyone tell you, oh, this is not going to make money, or there's no career future here, because a lot of people told me that 5 years ago, and today I'm here. I didn't really know that this was going to be an opportunity for me 5 years later, but we're living in a time where things are changing. Jobs, the type of jobs available out there are evolving, and you just cannot tell what's going to be available to you in the next 5 years. So follow what you're genuinely passionate about. Something will work out. Things will grow. I feel like that's my advice. I don't know if that
Hey,
resonates.
that we should like print that and frame that. I think that's pretty excellent, Mamta. Okay, everybody, come on. Anybody got some questions? She's giving you an open floor plan here, so take advantage. Anybody else got a question?
I am an avid TikTok user, so I use TikTok a lot.
Okay.
That being said, I am really heavily involved in like the cultural and political side of content. And I kind of had more of a question about your job process. So,
Yeah.
you know, how you said, you know, you kind of see two different sides of the spectrum a lot. Things can be very liberal, things can be very conservative, just depending on what side you're on.
Yeah.
And determining what I guess what content should stay up, you know, because sometimes things can get very heated. I've, you know, seen it get taken very far a lot of the times. What kind of like how do you manage, or how is like the process about going about like what's, you know, too far, what's not too far in terms of when we have like political conversations and things like that on the app?
So okay, before I actually answer your question, let me give you a little bit of context. Um, we have a global policy principle that we establish, and that's my job. But we also, TikTok as a platform actually localizes principles and community guidelines. So what this means is that we have market specialists for every region. So the US has one, Brazil will have one, for example, Singapore will have one. So we have a bunch of market specialists that will actually work with us to localize what is allowed on the platform and what is not, depending on cultural and market sensitivities. But to your point about political advocacy and politics, I think as a company, we maintain a very neutral stance on politics. The only time we come in and determine that content needs to be censored or taken off a platform is when it causes any form of severe harm to users or when there's misinformation involved. So we actually don't believe in censorship of content because one of the biggest principles for politics on the platform is freedom of expression. And I think sometimes that can be a hard line to draw between what we stand for as a platform, but also where does it come into play when it comes to freedom of expression? How are we not censoring varied perspectives? So I think for me, when it comes to politics, that's the stance we take. It's very unlike the other issues that we work on. But I don't know if I'm getting to your question. Like, am I directly answering your question
Oh, you
or?
got it right on the dot. That's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Who else? Oh, quiet. Mamta, is there anything else that you would like people to know when they're thinking about their future careers and
Yeah.
things? What general advice might you want to give?
Can I just ask how old is everyone on this call? Like, give me an age range.
Oh, anywhere.
Old.
Too young. I mean, you could have, we're community college, you know, 16 to 60, anywhere in the range.
Okay. So my advice is that take advantage of every job opportunity that comes your way, even if the title doesn't sound prestigious or comes with a form of status. That's one. I think the best jobs that I've had didn't sound like a good job to begin with, but I took away the most learning from those specific jobs. But on the other side of things, I also want you guys to keep a very open mind. I think generally, um, people assume that now, oh, if you're passionate about human rights, it's just the NGO space or you got to work for government. And it's not that way anymore. So I don't know if all of you are pursuing the same major or you guys are pursuing different majors at this point, but a lot of industries are actually intersecting and there's so many opportunities out there. So I think just keep an open mind. I I never planned my life 5 years ahead, and that was the point I did. It never worked, but take things one step at a time. I feel like just focus on your current job. I don't know where I'm going to be next year, but for now, I really enjoy my job. And most of the time, when it comes to the tech side of things, I still don't feel very confident, and every day is a learning journey for me. I'm great at issue knowledge because I have that experience, but when it comes to blending it with tech and processes and algorithms, I think that's what I'm still learning. So every job comes with its own learning. To just keep an open mind when it comes to any job opportunities you're looking at.
I think whatever your age, that's good advice. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I
go
think
ahead.
the other thing I wanted to maybe share, maybe I thought might be helpful given some of the questions here, is that you don't always have to be passionate about like a specific human right issue to work in tech. So like I know we brought out political advocacy. I know that tech is expanding and we hire a lot of people when it comes to government relations, when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to research, when it comes to issue knowledge or country policy. There's so many roles that are out there available in tech right now. We also hire people who enjoy partnerships with NGOs. So there's so many roles for you guys to explore. And if that's your area of interest, whether it's specifically in the NGO space or trying to translate this into tech, and you guys want to have like a one-on-one conversation, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or to send me an email. I'm okay if Stacy wants to share my email address. If you guys are more comfortable on a one-on-one basis, I'm happy to chat.
Well, anybody else?
I don't particularly know how to formulate this question, but looking at a global perspective here, and how there are so many different governmental regulations, not political, but just governmental regulations on social media type things. How, and I guess maybe I don't mean to answer my own question, but having those community leaders, in the different places, I guess those are the people with the specific knowledge as to what like allowable on social media or what have you. But how do other people find the true information about what one country or another may be allowing, or what have you? Does that make sense? I don't even know if that makes sense, but like it's so easy to see something written on a Facebook or a Twitter like, well, China doesn't allow XYZ, and it just is maybe just somebody talking outside of their head versus looking at real data.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So misinformation is pretty big on not just with TikTok, it's big across social media in general. And I think when it comes to addressing it, there's so many processes in place to combat it, at least at TikTok, right? But to your point about different regions having different regulatory compliances and regulations for us to follow, that's where our teams, our market specialist teams come in. We also don't just work with policy, right? So market specialist teams will be in regular touch with government agencies so that they keep track of any updates or changes to laws or information that the government is feeding us. We also get escalation. So for example, if the government thinks that this is a trend that's going around and it's incorrect information, it's flagged to us immediately, and then we look at it on an escalation basis. But we also empower users to report videos. So for those of you that are on the platform, you know that if you see something that's not appropriate, you can actually report it to us. And we have teams dedicated to filtering out that information, and they would work with cross-functional teams. So market specialists, me, a number of people will be involved to determine if such content needs to be on the platform versus off the platform. But to your point again, yes, it is difficult. And given that TikTok is growing so quickly, we are trying to make sure that our solutions are scalable, but it's a day-to-day challenge when it comes to working with different regions. And that's just, I guess that's just the challenge that comes with working globally with so many countries.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
So,
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else that has a question? So we want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, especially at 1 o'clock in the It's now almost bed, it's way past your bedtime. So thank you so much for taking the time. We
course.
really appreciate it.
Well,
So,
I am so happy to be here. I love it because I went to community college, so anything to give back in any way that I can.
yeah,